We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Nione peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
Welcome to our listeners and our speakers from sunny London today. My name is Sarah Ahmed and I'm delighted to be moderating this session. Joining me, we have Andrew Siddle from Larry Cherubino, Daniel Hetherington from Capel, Vale, Vanessa Carson from Plan B on Riesling. Waiting in the wings, there they are. Waiting in the wings, we have Russell Cocker from Lenton, Brae, Cliff Royal from Flametree, and Bruce Dukes from Domaine, Naturaliste. And in tune today, with today's sunny London weather and blue skies, our focus is crisp summer whites, and specifically Great Southern Riesling and Margaret River Sauvignon Blanc Semillon. Now, 6 winemakers are going to share the depth of knowledge and enthusiasm about these categories. And of course, we've got 6 glittering wines with, I think, more gold medals than Usain Bolt between them. And I had a sneak preview of these wines, tasting from the regular full bottles. And let me say, I share and support that enthusiasm to the hilt. These are wines that I love to drink, and they take me to those regions and that sea, sun and sand, happy place, not to mention, fabulous fresh fish and shellfish. There is a regional stamp to these wines for sure. And there's also a Western Australian seal of quality. 3 days later, my full bottles were still drinking well. And no doubt about it, this is premium wine country. And I think you're going to see flair and ambition brought to these wines. No cookie cutters. Each example is different. And the winemakers will share with you their individual approaches when they talk about the wines. So much as these are smashable, crisp summer whites, they're also wines of substance and, with complexity and interest and staying power. And with recommended retail prices between the £15 and £20 mark, these are accessibly priced wines that are widely available, certainly wines that I buy at home. So a bit of housekeeping. Wines of Western Australia, Exhibit A, have produced this brilliant booklet, which gives you a location map showing the Western Australian wine regions and details of today's producers. You've got a separate map as well, if you've received the hard copy. Historical timelines, so you could track the development of these modern classic regions, key facts about terroir, and these hero categories for Great Southern and Margaret River. And there's lots of detail about the vineyards and winemaking in the booklet, and also those retail prices. If you've not received the hard copies, please click on the handouts tab to the right of the Q&A tab, and you can download them. So a little bit about the format of the session. The winemakers will introduce their wines in turn, starting with the Rieslings, then the Semillon Sauvignon Blancs, or Sauvignon Blanc Semillons, as the case may be. I've asked each of them to cover a key topic so you can have an overview about the category as a whole for a bit of context. Questions, I'm sure that you are all going to have your own questions, so fire away with those in the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, the Q&A tab, and then I'll be watching for those and putting them to the winemakers as we go along or at the end. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, do not worry, Team Wine Australia will be on it and will follow up on your behalf and get back to you with those answers. So we're going to kick off with Great Southern Riesling, and it represents, Riesling represents about 8.5% of the total crush in Great Southern, which has around 2,500 hectares under vine. Andrew Siddle on the left there from Larry Cherubino kicks off. And I've asked Andrew to set the scene. Why does Riesling flourish in Great Southern, as well as talking about his wine? But first of all, he's going to give an acknowledgement to the custodians in Western Australia. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. We acknowledge the Noongar people of this region as the traditional custodians of the land, and we pay respects to the elders past, present and future.
So Andrew, talk us through, set the scene. Why does Riesling flourish in Great Southern?
Oh, it's a very long question, Sarah. Very long answer, but
Nutshell guide.
Had been down there, fortunate enough to be in the Great Southern, working with fruit there for over 15 years. So, initially down there previously, and now up in Cherubino with Larry. I think it's mainly to do with the influence of the Southern Ocean. There's a real maritime influence as you are close to the coast, and as you further get out towards Franklin River, which is a little bit warmer, you're in more of a continental climate, but you're getting the sea breeze in the afternoon, and you're getting a lot of diurnal range up there, so we're getting a lot of really warm to dry days, but cool nights. So just as an example, from our vineyard in Riversdale, we might be 30 degrees, 32, 33 during the day, but we've seen temperatures down below 5 or 6 degrees at night. So that's a really strong input. Yeah, it's huge, and it's really important to produce premium fruit, particularly Riesling. You know, the structure and the acidity still remains, while during the day we're getting some really nice accumulation of sugars and flavours too. So, yeah. But yeah, so we're predominantly focused in Franklin River. We're starting to move our vineyard sources all up there. Larry and his wife Edwina have got a vineyard called Riversdale, and which is probably 110 hectares or so. 20 of that is Riesling, and from there we produce a range of Rieslings, including the ad hoc that I was going to talk about today. So yeah.
Yeah, and that one is a single vineyard. It's actually all Riversdale fruit.
Correct.
Ad hoc. Yeah.
Yeah. So a state fruit. What we do is we are very meticulous on our picking schedule out there. So of that 20 hectares, we would probably looking at between 10 and 15 picks. 2 or 3 of those are hand-picked, and it's very important for us to get the balance of the wine, or the grapes out there right. You know, a lot of the work's done in the vineyard, and then from there we just, as winemakers, lounge back and watch it into its glory.
But I mean, fastidious in the vineyard, because I recall 15 picks for this Riesling. So you've got 20 hectares of Riesling, and for this ad hoc Riesling, which is your entry-level Riesling, you've got 15 picks, so you can really build in the balance into the wine. And I think it's something that I feel in this wine. There's a real complexity of flavour, and still with that great acid backbone, but some lovely fruit, and not just citrus fruit. You know, hints of honey coming along, and those 15 picks, I think it really shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as I was saying, some of them are hand-picked just to provide a bit more delicacy to the wine. And then as we go further down the hill, we start machine harvesting a bit more. And we're really big on making wines that work to the consumer, I guess. The ultimate goal is to sell wine. So we're not trying to produce an austere Riesling. It's all about texture, flavour and acid profile. So we feel we get a lot of that from the vineyard, and then there's just the odd a little bit of magic in the winery that kind of just pulls it all together.
Yeah, and I think important to say, and I remember always talking about, it's a very boring topic of the press cut with dry Rieslings. And I think it's around 500 litres a tonne. So really just trying to get beautiful fruit without putting through any phenolics in this wine. A very classically made dry Riesling.
Correct, yeah. We're somewhere between 450 to 500 litres per tonne. 2021 was pretty low yielding per hectare, so it's probably a bit of a hard pill to swallow sometimes when you see the cost per litre of these wines that we're making. But yeah, it's all about pristine fruit, integrity of the vineyard, and we definitely don't want to see any of those phenolics. So this Wallflower Riesling is 100% free run, and we try and keep the parcels free and separate as long as we can. Much to the detriment sometimes when you've got a pretty small winery, but you've got 12 or 13 different parcels that are fermenting of Riesling, and there's nowhere to press and crush anything else to. But it's probably a real passion of ours, particularly Larry's and myself, to on the Riesling front. So kind of we just deal with that and suck it up, and figure out the rest.
Well, I know Larry has described 2021 as one of the best vintages for Riesling in recent memory, because you had excellent spring rain, it was a mild, long season, and those low yields. So I think you see fabulous freshness and purity and intensity. We've got a few questions that I'm going to put to you, Andrew. So one question, and I think I can answer this quickly actually, is searching on Wine Searcher, lots of retailers listing ad hoc, say it's from Mount Barker, but I know that the sourcing has changed over the years, and sometimes it's been multi-sub-regional, but it's about Larry's and Edwina's vineyard and bringing things back to Riverdale. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We've early days of just establishing the business, we had vineyard sources that weren't ours, but as we've kind of developed up and worked our way through things and established our own vineyard source, we're trying to focus everything to be 100% estate. That's the ultimate goal across the board.
Great. Thanks, Tom, for picking that up, Tom Canavan. Hannah Aldgate has just said, could you summarise the tasting characteristics of Great Southern Riesling and Margaret River Riesling generally versus, say, Eden Valley or Clare Valley? Andrew, give it your best shot.
Too much Riesling in Margaret River, so the focus of Riesling is in Great Southern in Western Australia. If I was to describe those, the South Australian regions are probably more directed in that riper style. There's a hotter climate over there, so you're probably not seeing as much pristine fruit and linear acid that you see in Great Southern, although Franklin River probably has a little bit more push towards those other climates in South Australia, those other regions. But yeah, we're definitely a citrus, kind of citrus fruit, lime orientation in the Great Southern, whereas the others are probably more focused on riper fruits.
Yeah, I mean, I think I noticed, especially I was looking at some notes of mine from 2008 when I did a 2-week Riesling trip in Clare Valley, Eden Valley, Great Southern. And especially when the Great Southern wines age, I think that they have less of that sort of lemon and lime butter, a little bit more delicate and honeyed. So you see that sort of pulling through that cooler climate and, always with this, wonderful backbone of acidity. So I would just add that. Andrew, you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have an unbelievable, the wines have an unbelievable ability to age, and when we're in 10, 15 years plus, it's a lot of freshness about them still, fresh honey, like
really silky and honey.
Nuttiness there, but nothing over the top.
Yeah, brilliant. Andrew, thanks so much. We'll move on to Daniel. Daniel Hetherington, winemaker at Capel, Vale. And Capel Vale, we're going from Franklin River with the Larry Cherubino wine to Mount Barker, and another single vineyard wine from Whispering Hill, which is owned by Capel Vale. Mount Barker, Daniel, is where it all started for wine in Great Southern, and also Riesling in Mount Barker. So could you tell us a little bit about that history of Riesling? And yeah, great to have your thoughts as well on how Rieslings age from Great Southern, because we have got a strong track record being the first region to have Riesling in Western Australia.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. So Forest Hill were the first winery to plant Riesling in the Great Southern in 1965, and then Tony Smith followed fairly quickly after, and he planted the Brae vineyard in Mount Barker as well. And then more plantings, some very large plantings followed in Franklin River, more in Mount Barker, and then some really small sort of boutique vineyards popped up in the east and the Parongarups. For Capel Vale, Peter Pratton, who started the winery, his big passion's always been Riesling. He first planted Riesling on the banks of the Capel River on very heavy clay soils. Quickly worked out that was definitely the wrong place for Riesling, so went hunting for a nice piece of rocky dirt to the east of Mount Barker, and Whispering Hill was established. There was always a big focus on Riesling in the Great Southern. Planted some to some sort of sandy silica soils, some on some really sort of granite sort of outcrop, real rocky soils, and then some nice sort of laterite sort of clay mix soils. And we've left with 5 hectares of really good Riesling vines.
Great. And you make this wine is like ad hoc Riesling. It's all from Whispering Hill, but you also make a label, which is your top label, the top cut, which is described and labelled as Whispering Hill. So it's a key vineyard for you, but a little bit different from the Cherubino. This one has a little bit of press cutting in it because this is your entry level one. Tell us about your approach there.
Sure. So we do make 2 Rieslings. We make the Whispering Hill single vineyard wine, which is our top end wine. Most years that's handpicked, very lightly pressed, 100% free run, very delicate, fine Riesling. Definitely the best expression that we can do from our vines. And then the regional series, which is the second tier or entry level, that's mostly free run. Depending on the season, we'll add a little bit of pressings back. 2020 vintage was very warm for us in the Great Southern. So it's a little bit more robust or full-bodied than we'd like to see for our Rieslings. So we only added a very small amount of pressings back to the wine, just so we could retain that natural acidity. We always try not to acid adjust where possible. And then the hard pressings, the juice that's heavy in phenolics, we utilise elsewhere. In super entry level wines.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I was tasting that wine, and especially going from the Cherubino, you see that it's more of that sort of orange blossom than lemon and lime, and a bit broader on the palate. But that wine, I left the bottle and was away for a weekend and came back 5 days later, and it was still looking great actually. So again, that underpinning of acid, which is such a great Southern thing, I think, very much there in that wine. Now, Daniel, for your sins for mentioning laterite in the booklet, we've got a question from Tanlin Curran. Could you tell us a bit more about laterite? So it's about the gravelly granite soils, isn't it?
Sure. So the laterite is gravel. It's weathered granite. So as granite rocks age, laterite gravels formed. It's full of iron, other minerals. It's really giving us the flavour, the minerality from the soil.
Yeah, and laterite, you get widely across the southern part of Western Australia, and I think you do find that kind of mineral expression coming through beautifully in the red and the white wines. Daniel, last question. Tell us a little bit about the profile of the wine as it ages. and your experience of ageability of Great Southern Riesling?
Sure. So with the 2020, so we've got a 2020 vintage here, which was a really warm vintage. So you can just see the first hints of development on the edges of the wine. There's a little bit of Kero. So in the warmer vintages, which we do get in the Great Southern, you get that kerosene, those fusel notes earlier in the wine, and they tend to lock in through the life of the wine. On a lovely cool vintage like the 21 that Andrew's got, or the 16, the fusel notes don't come in till a lot later, and they stay lovely and bright and delicate for 5 and even 10 years if you're lucky.
Brilliant.
It's up to the consumer, what they prefer. Some people love the Kero, some people can't stand it. But once you start digging into Riesling, you can pick your vintages and find something that you can age that works for you.
Great. Thanks so much. We'll move on to Vanessa. Vanessa Carson, Plan B, Dr. Riesling, 2021. So we're going back to the 2021 vintage. And Vanessa, I think it's 15 years you lived in Franklin River?
Yes, have been.
Yes, so you are exactly the best person to answer this question from Rosemary Brown, which is, what is the size of the Franklin River region?
What is the size of the Franklin River region?
And how many hectares of Riesling are grown there? Rough idea on that one.
What are you trying to do to me? She's no, I don't know the answer. It's massive, Sarah. It's massive. It's a huge area. It's very long. There's very little grapes there. Sorry, I want to find a friend. It covers a massive area. The actual plantings within Franklin are not massive. There are some large plantings that went in, 99, 97, around that time. There was a big input, and then a further input sort of in the mid-2000s. There are some good-sized vineyards through there. There are a lot of smaller-sized vineyards as well. It's a very exciting area to be in.
And for Riesling, I think some real key Riesling producers there. Obviously, Franklin River Estate, Franklin Estate, Ferngrove, who you used to work for, Larry Cherubino there, so Swinney, where you buy your fruit from, they're a new entrant to the market that have been selling fruit. So, Vanessa, anyway, Plan B Riesling, different profile from the other two, I would say. So, classic Australian Riesling, bone dry, rapier-like acidity. And I think in the last decade or so, we've seen a greater diversity of Riesling styles across Australia and the specialist regions. And I don't think Great Southern is any different. So Dr. Riesling, for me, is dry, but with more generous fruit and a softer acid profile. And I know that Great Southern producers, yourself included, are also making off-dry, sweeter and foudre fermented examples in Great Southern. Can you give us a temperature check on where Riesling is in Great Southern and what are the stylistic trends?
At the moment in the Great Southern, it is so exciting. Probably 8-10 years ago, people were pulling vines out. And as you know, Sarah, when people are pulling vines out, they're the vines that you should be planting because it's going to come around in fashion again. And it's exactly what's happened with Riesling. I had to fight for berries, Sarah, actual berries to make my Riesling this year. Wow. Everyone wants to jump on board. They are all so excited. I'm trying to fight them off, go away. I shouldn't even be doing this and telling people about it. It is a very, very exciting place to be at the moment. And I think, we're pretty lucky where we are in that, I'm going to quote, and it's not going to be quite correct, but I believe Halliday once said, if Franklin or if the Great Southern had been planted to Riesling first instead of Clare and Eden, would Riesling actually be in the Clare and Eden? It didn't turn out that way. Sorry?
Punchy statement.
Well, it is. Well, you know, I'm going to hang my hat on it. I thought the guy's a genius. But what it's meant is that I feel that we've not been pigeonholed with a style. So it means that we can play with a lot of different styles and a lot of different techniques. So as you pointed out, like for Plan B, we make 3 Rieslings out of the region. I have the dry style, an off-dry style, which sits between 10.5%, 11% alcohol, about 20 odd grams residual sugar, a bit of spritz in there as well to try and balance out the sugar. And then we also do another one, which we've just started doing, which is an oak fermented Riesling, just in barriques. Would love to be in foudres. And these are not new techniques. Obviously, our European counterparts have been using these techniques for years. But I think it means, you know, we've been allowed to expand our styles in the region, and that's pretty exciting. It's a pretty awesome place to be at the moment.
And tell me, coming back to Dr. L, so that softer acid profile for me, a little fleshier and not some, you know, there's citrus fruit there, but also a bit of peach skin texture. And I think the other thing I was going to say about it is the press cut on this one is 680 litres a tonne. So, you know, you're letting a bit more, you're squeezing the grapes a little bit harder. So tell us about that.
Quite correct. As you said earlier in the introduction, we source this fruit from the Swinney vineyard, and that vineyard, the vines are, you know, over 20, being closer to 30 years old now, and it comes off this one particular block, and I like to try and let the fruit hang out there just for a little bit longer, try and get some weight. I think Riesling, we are allowed to push it. I think the old days of drinking Riesling at 11%, 11.5% are probably gone. I think I think we are permissible to go up to that 13.5%. Not that this one is, but, you know, there is a nice range that we can have a play in. From there, I mean, this wine also has about 4.5 grams residual sugar in it, and that is to balance out the acid. So it's not that searingly fine-lined Riesling, which is beautiful in itself and has a style unto itself, but I'm trying to make Rieslings that are about balance and approachability from the get-go. You know, in terms of pressing, overall, per tonne, we're getting about 680 litres, but we do make a press cut. We do have the free run and the pressings, and this is 100% free run. So I'm sorry, your information is slightly wrong. I didn't double check that.
Apologies. But when you get that higher press cut, so 680 versus 450, 500, what's the impact on the juice and the resulting wine?
So Riesling pressings, I think we've changed a lot as well over the years. You know, 20 years ago, Riesling pressings were pretty bloody awful. They were very, very tannic, a bit like sucking on a oxidised apple, not very nice. I think we have learnt to deal with our pressings a lot better. I don't think we are pressing to try and get as much from the grapes, you know, not pressing to that absolute dryness where you cannot squeeze anything out of it. So we're willing to sort of sacrifice a little to try and have softer, cleaner pressings. You know, free run is all about cleanliness and linearity and drive of acid. And the pressings can have a really fun input into the wine as well. You can start to use those for a little bit of texture.
Yeah, but generally pressing is not being used in these wines, and that's not usually the practice. But this press cut can change quite a bit. Vanessa, that's great, thank you. Just one last question very quickly from Jim Core about TDN in wines, welcome or not?
Which ones?
TDN in wine.
Oh gosh, I'm so not the best person to answer. I honestly don't think I can even taste kerosene in wines.
Well, that's kind of what I touched on, Sarah. I'll go. That's what I was getting at with the fusel and the kerosene notes. Some people love it. They think that should be in an aged Riesling. Some people just can't stand it and literally turn their nose up at it. Personally, I've got no problem with TDN. You prefer to see it to come in later in the wines. You don't want to see it after 18 months in bottle. But TDN's fine in Riesling, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Well, we'll finish on Riesling there and call over our Margaret River Semillon Sauvignon Blanc producers, and we'll get you back for Q&A at the end. Thanks so much. Thank you. So shuffling along, let me tell everyone a little bit about Semillon Sauvignon Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends from Margaret River. So the emphasis on the blend can change, obviously, different house styles. Margaret River has about double the plantings of Great Southern with 5,840 hectares. And in 2021, there were more tons of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon crushed than Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay combined. So this is a really big category. The blend represents about 37.5% of the total crush based on 5-year data for Margaret River. And no one better to speak to the popularity of Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blends than Russell Cocker from Lenton Brae. Because for you, Russell, it's about 50% of production. So it's key to your range, and Lenton Brae, one of the first, one of the pioneers of Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend since 1987. So tell us how the blend came about, the Bordeaux connection for this blend, and the role of the different varieties in the blend.
Okay, we have a firm and deep respect for the original or the great classic wines of Bordeaux of over a century gone by. So the emphasis and the encouragement with our owners of that time were to respect and I guess to not to duplicate or replicate those iconic wines, but to maybe identify and to reinterpret, or maybe, how's the best way to say it, develop our own house style on the success of those true classic whites, Bordelais whites, of such a well-reputed red region. So at that time, there was a lot of emphasis going back to the 50s by the local ag department on planting reds, and later into the 60s on Chardonnay. So I guess our previous owners and our previous winemakers really did identify with the success of the truly great classic whites of Bordeaux, and being such a well-identified region post-dairy farming with red production and then Chardonnay, I think they really they encouraged themselves to go out there and identify with Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc as an iconic blend, and to go forth and pave their way in making and just creating a new identifiable icon of Margaret River.
I think that sort of Bordeaux blend, the mirroring what's happening with the red and the Cabernet Bordeaux sort of blends. And in a similar way, I think that Margaret River, with that long ripening period, much drier than Bordeaux, to be able to get that beautiful fruit centre in the wines and purity and pristine fruit, I think a key thing. So Russ, I read that, so this is the 36th consecutive vintage of the Lenton Brae Semillon Sauvignon Blanc we're looking at. And I read that the first two vintages from 87 and 88 were labelled Semillon, even though they were blends. Tell us about, and your wine, I should emphasise, is much more Semillon than the other two, which are much more Sauvignon Blanc led. Tell us about the roles of those different varieties. What do they bring to the party?
Our interpretation of SSB, or even for us, it's more of an underlying textural and line and length sort of motivation. So we look at this wine as being certainly capable of aging well beyond a decade, even up to 2. So we enjoy the synergy that the two varieties offer each other, but not just in identifying with the truly iconic classic whites of years gone by of Bordeaux. We firmly identify with the length and the generosity and texture that Semillon has to offer this blend. I wouldn't call us stubborn or stoic in staying set in our ways of producing solely Semillon Sauvignon Blanc, but it has helped us build and evolve this category of wine into quite a long-living bottle-aged wine style that doesn't necessarily show, aldehydes, that sort of thing, and bottle development as such. It holds its youth long into its age, bottle age. So we have renditions of this variety going back, going back to 05, 09, that we still show and fetch great claim. So, it's not just a tutti frutti drink now style. I think with the underlying generosity and texture of Semillon, and that comes partly through the way we resource our fruit inputs for Semillon. So we use the toastier, riper component of Willy Abrut fruit, and then the slightly more aromatic and longer ripening Sauvignon Blanc components are further south of Margaret River from particular contractual growers that offer us the ability to basically change things up in the winery post picking and look to just find or maybe add more than just physiological balance off the vine to the wine through vinification by things like juice stirring, try to ferment.
Yeah, and that I think is the joy of the blend, having the two varieties to play with, but also, going north, going south, especially most of the Sauvignon, I think that people are working with, the blends is coming from the south. Russ, thanks so much. Perfect.
Thank you
and lovely to taste that very, I would say, classic in the sense that the Lenton Brae is unoaked. But a premium example, which for me really takes me to the place, that sort of dusty grapefruit, that laterite, let's use that word again, minerality coming through in the wine. This is a really great example of unoaked, unplayed around with blend. So Cliff Royal from Flametree. We're going now into Sauvignon Blanc first territory, firmly Sauvignon Blanc first. But look, it's touching on what I just was talking about with Russ, that being a blend, there's a lot of scope for different house styles. And what I've noticed is boutique players, Flametree included, are making a range of distinctive profiles. Talk us through the evolution of the category from what was a generic entry-level so-called classic white to, premium wines, use of wild ferment, solids and skins, batonnage, eggs, amphora, orange wines, oak. We're seeing, it's a category that I feel that Margaret River producers are having a lot of fun with and really expressing themselves. So please do, in the words of Madonna, express yourself.
This is 2 minutes, right? There's a lot of thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Look, the category in the 25 years that I've been involved in making the wines has evolved enormously, and we probably don't have a lot of time to go into the why and what fors, but in that time, back in those days, Margaret River owned wine lists in every state, in every capital city. Every wine list had 3 or 4 of these SSB wines on by the glass, and they literally owned the aromatic white category. Crunchy seafood, as you talked about. And then we had, I guess, people getting a little bit, okay, we've seen those wines, so what's next? And then the introduction of a few international varieties, some imports. Then people started growing them locally. Then we had the Savalanche from New Zealand. And then people started getting into Pinot Gris, Grigios, Vermentinos, and a few bits and pieces. And I think that forced a lot of the local winemakers to assess the wines that they were making, because like you rightly pointed out, those early wines were quite simple in that they were very fruit driven, they had a little bit of residual sugar, and there was the same about them. So I think everybody went back to the drawing board and decided that we could introduce some of the things that people liked about these other wines, these nuances of phenolics, these little bits of barrel ferment without going 100%, old wood, large format, like you said, the amphoras, the eggs and the like, that introduce those beautiful nuances around protecting the purity of the fruit characters.
Yeah, and I mean, this is your middle tier in the sort of aromatic white elements of your portfolio. And, you know, there's so much, you know, thought gone into, you know, all the different components. So tell us a little bit about that, Cliff, you know, putting this blend together and all the different elements.
Full circle, and I know Russ mentioned it, we went the full white Bordeaux style, and then felt that the wood didn't always suit the wine. We also believe that the Semillon has a very important role to play with the texture and the back palate of the wine, whilst for me the Sauvignon Blanc is very much the purity and line in the wine and the punch, and you get great citrus and stone fruit, which I think is what we're looking for. The wines of yesteryear might have been a little more tropical. So yeah, those we do a little bit of wild ferment. We do a little bit of whole berry ferment. Those techniques give a little bit of sulfide and a little bit of salinity. They don't give those sort of very yeast-derived flavours that for me can be a bit same and a bit obvious. And we use some old puncheons. We do a bit of stainless steel, and we also have a couple of batches going through amphora now, and that gives a really interesting, you know, slightly almost oxidised character. And there are certainly a few people in Margaret River I know now starting to oxidise Sauvignon Blanc juices, looking for that more subtle Loire, wet woolly dog, lees in barrel. So they're looking for those almost what I would say is Gris complexities and phenolics, which I guess historically we've scrubbed out of our wines. And I think now we realise that those components can be really useful in wines and actually really help the modern food flavours that we're serving at our restaurants.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, to me, it's such an interesting and really dynamic category from something that originally was quite cookie cutter and commercial and simple. And I've got a question for you from Mark Manson, who says, why did we stop calling it classic dry white? And can we still call it classic dry white? Is that phrase still used at all?
Well, I think the wines got more serious than that, and I think they needed to get a name to them that was a bit more serious. Classic, I mean, what does classic mean? I think they were classic to us, but of course, once they went beyond Australia into the world, classic doesn't really mean that much. There are still wines around that are called classics today. They're more in that sort of very commercial price point, but I think giving them a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon or a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc name and talking to the wines is a lot more appropriate.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I think also that, you know, it comes back to that point. Classic dry white, there's so many different house styles, which is, I think, part of the excitement of the category. And classic dry white doesn't really, that generic phrase doesn't really encompass. It's almost better to know the name of the producer and what kind of style they're running with. Which brings me neatly on to Mr. Dukes, Bruce Dukes. Thank you, Cliff, from Domaine Naturaliste. We're looking at Bruce's Discovery Sauvignon Blanc Semillon. And I noticed in the booklet, it doesn't give the percentages of the varieties, but it's 87% Sauvignon Blanc and 13% Semillon. Now, whether for red or white Bordeaux blends, and I touched on it before, Margaret River's long temperate growing season, for me, just reliably delivers fruit intensity over those herbal characters in the wines. And Bruce, I wanted to ask you about, you know, getting the fruit into that sweet spot where, and I use this brilliant phrase from Bruce, where you get beyond the hippie chic herbals, because you can get a touch of hashish, I think, when you get these Semillon Sauvignon blends, which are probably very nice for some people. But anyway, how do you avoid that but maintain freshness and line, even if, as in your case, you're barrel fermenting all of it? So Bruce, tell us about getting that beautiful fruit.
Well, one of the things that I love about the very sort of long, very gentle growing season in Margaret River is that it allows a number of different varietals to reach their natural physiological ripeness. And one of the characters of our region is early afternoon during the sort of ripening period, we'll have lovely breezes come from the southwest, and they're moisture-laden breezes that will cool down the area. And so the plants can actually still keep photosynthesizing, making sugars. And of course, those sugars that are present beyond what's required for growth of the plant can be used to make luxury compounds, so aroma and flavour compounds. And so the climate is really well suited to the biology of those vines. And then I find the vines very much sort of chameleon-like to their site and very, very responsive to light. And so I think something we've learned over the last couple of decades in Margaret River is really sort of fine-tuning the grapes to the site. And for example, what I'm talking about is, say, on the east side of our north-south rows, which gets the very sort of soft morning sun, we allow a lovely sort of dappled light to go through the canopies. And you could describe it as almost just having one layer of leaves protecting the fruit. And so that beautiful dappled light allows the grapes to get the most gentle suntans as they go over the season, but they push beyond the spectrum of grass and that style of elements and can get to the beautiful guava, nectarine and lychee spectrum, which is at least an area that I love exploring. And it's quite a demanding variety too, because you have this very, very tight window of opportunity to capture those beautiful aromatics as well as the natural acid balance. And I try and get that pivot point where I can harvest, make a wine with those varieties so that I don't have to add anything to it. And I think that, to me, is success in agriculture, because you're making the most pure food you possibly can, and in this case the wine. And as long as that wine has a cultural relevance, meaning it fits in with our sort of cultural values and the style of foods and things we like at the time, I think that's just fantastic.
Yeah,
my wine does vary a little bit in the proportions of Sauvignon, Blanc and Semillon, and they're lovely sort of partners that play together. And quite interestingly, in Margaret River, we're quite often having the Semillon reaching a beautiful physiological ripeness at slightly lower sort of sugar levels than the Sauvignon Blanc, which has a little bit more acid, a little bit more brightness. And so the two varieties joining together not only sort of have aromatic and flavour symmetries, but it also sort of helps create these quite fragrant but quite restrained sort of alcohol level wines, so that we sort of refer to them as smashable, so that they're just crisp, quenching and ready to go.
Yeah. And Bruce, one thing I wanted to ask you about was, you mentioned that since 2020, so this vintage included, you've moved from, I think it was around a third ferment in seasoned oak to now 100% ferment in seasoned oak. And for me, you get that sort of almost like a Loire sort of wooded Sauvignon, Sancerre. You get that kind of blackcurrant bud on the nose, but kind of quite restrained. But then on the palate, as you said, there's that guava, there's a bit of dusty fig, there's that classic sort of grapefruity kind of character. So, getting that fruit quality must be absolutely key to being, putting that oak at it, even though it's seasoned.
I getting that fruit quality, and like anything, when you have friends round for dinner, I at least try and get some lovely produce, present it very honestly. And with the oak, it was usually about 1/3 in older oak, 2/3 in stainless. And so over time, and it was pretty simple, I just always preferred the textural elements and flavour elements for my style of the barrel fermented portion. And of course, I absolutely love oak, but I don't necessarily want to taste oak in the wine. And so the use of the 4th, 5th, 6th use oak that's had all of the woody elements, the toasty, the tannic elements, long gone, because I think of these barrels as just the most beautiful container to sort of gently hug the wine, allow it to breathe. And of course, my wine's only really in there for its fermentation, weekly batonnage for 2 months, and that actually comes out quite early in the season. So it's actually bottled during the winter, and it means the wines can be very fresh, very low levels of sulfur, but also bottling during winter. Every time you seem to bottle a wine, it gets angry with you and goes into a little bit of bottle shock. And so it's lovely that by the time we hit the West Australian summer, these wines are jumping out of the glass and ready to be enjoyed.
Just like the fish jumping out of the sea, the wine jumping out of the glass, it's perfect. Brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. Now, can we bring our Riesling winemakers back, and we'll have 10 minutes on questions. And just while we're doing that, question to you three, don't mind who takes it. There's not a great deal of single varietals, Semillon or Sauvignon Blanc about, but tell me about that. Who would like to just talk about, and because I know some of you do make a single varietal Sauvignon or Semillon. What's the trend on that?
We make a top end single vineyard Sauvignon Blanc, and we certainly think that Sauvignon Blanc can stand alone, and that wine is just the first 150 litres of our best material per tonne, and then with solids, and then into a mixture of second use oak and stainless steel again, and then we blend the barrels accordingly to the season. It's very, very simple, but it's very tight. It's really wild fermented, and it doesn't need the Semillon for the season. And I still think that it's a big place, and there's really good pockets of Sauvignon Blanc. But I just think in comparison to a lot of Sauvignon Blancs from other regions, people might be looking for something a bit different. So for us, that wine goes just into restaurants.
Yeah. And any thoughts on why a drift from more Semillon focus to Sauvignon focus?
Sorry, what was that?
In the blends? More of a shift from a Semillon to a Sauvignon Blanc focus in blends. Was that a little bit influenced by the Avalanche, the interest in Sauvignon Blanc? There was more Sauvignon planted?
One of the influences too might be the location of the vineyards within the Margaret River region. And there seems to be different expressions of the varietal to the different sub-regions in Margaret River. And so the Semillon from the north and leaner sites seems to really flourish on those sites, and the slightly cooler sites in the south tend to provide higher level aromatics, higher levels of acid. And so there's probably been a cultural evolution to where your vineyards are actually located.
Yeah. Question from Gabriel Stone, which is on Great Southern. Would you like to see more sub-regional definition within Great Southern? And if so, are there any strong candidates? Who wants to take that?
I'll jump in. Absolutely. I couldn't answer any of your other questions, so I'll try and answer.
Not so.
Look, to be honest, there is certainly sub-regional, we've got the 5 sub-regions of the Great Southern. There is a big difference between Franklin River fruit compared to Mount Barker fruit compared to Prongrops, Denmark. There is a huge variation. And you can, I think for me, Mount Barker Riesling has this beautiful floral lift to it, which we just don't get in Franklin. The Prongrops have this amazing line and length. Their acid is just so clear. It's just, they're wines that are going to last for 30, 40 years. Buy them when your children are 2, and they'll be able to drink them eventually when they graduate and turn 40. But I just further to that, I personally think there is Riesling is so vineyard expressive and block expressive. You can have Rieslings planted on the same vineyard and be 200 metres down the road between your 2 blocks, and they're completely different. And I don't know any other variety that shows that quite so much, and you sort of hark back, you can go, I remember going to the Mosel and seeing vineyards planted on a blue slate, grey slate and red slate. And, after half an hour there, I was able to tell, what vineyard was planted on what. They really are expressive of exactly where their roots are.
I always remember Kerry Thompson coming up with the phrase, Riesling is a variety with a postcode. So it's almost the individual producer and the block, the wine that's important. But certainly for me, I noticed the kind of differences that Vanessa was talking about in the different sub-regions. And I think often people think Great Southern is, needs to be better known. So Great Southern goes on the label rather than the sub-region and all the vineyard details. So it's certainly worth, I think, for the audience out there, looking at the back label and looking to see where the wine's from. And, that's super useful information. And especially, as Vanessa says, with Riesling. Market positioning for these wines. So everybody always talks about Riesling, it's a difficult sell. Blends, especially white blends, people go, they're a difficult sell, more difficult than single varietal, certainly Sauvignon Blanc. So where are you seeing most demand for the Rieslings and the Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends?
Probably my house, Sarah. I can drink my off-dry for breakfast. I really do enjoy it. This is not my field. I'm not marketing.
They're still very much evenly spread across on and off premise. I think there's still a presence in the restaurant trade, no doubt. Those wines that used to have 3 wines by the glass are now probably 1 wine. And now we've got Riesling by the glass and we've got other varieties. So they're still going through the restaurants, probably not at the same rate they once were. And we're still seeing them moving through retail as well. So they're definitely, ours is certainly 50-50, and from what I speak to most people, that's about right. Yeah,
and I imagine with the Rieslings, especially, your local market of Jakarta, closer, Perth is closer to Jakarta than to Sydney, all those fusion flavours to play with, really perfect with the Rieslings.
Absolutely. For those beautiful flavours, they just go hand in hand. They're just delightful. So it's one of those perfect marriages.
Now I've got a question, which is, and I think this is going to be of particular relevance given the COVID times that we've been living in, and just for the audience, when I've been in touch with the winemakers before this session, and they've all been struggling with not only vintage but also COVID, because WA has, been under super duper lockdown. So Mike Turner asked, in terms of hand picking, how easy is it to get labour to do the picking? And I guess a lot of pressure in the last couple of years. 1 minute we've got on this, and then I'll have to say thank you.
Last 2 vintages here has been really tough, especially for hand pickers.
Yeah.
in general, really, as well. You know, finding with the attrition rate of people leaving and the borders being closed, it's caused problems as well, not just for handpick, but generally in the winery sense as well.
I think people had to make decisions. Premium Chardonnay was still being handpicked, but I think a lot of decisions were made about some other varieties that might have otherwise been handpicked that this year. And because it was such a compressed vintage and you weren't really sure, you sort of had to get them off. And there were a lot of machines working very quickly at one stage.
But excitement about this vintage, though, still the quality of the vintage I'm picking up from everyone.
I'm super excited because it was just this beautiful, long, gentle, warm season that allowed you the luxury of harvesting the grapes when they were physiologically ripe. And as long as we had some nets to stop silver-eye birds or kangaroos eating them, we were lucky.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's that time when I'm raising my glass for cheers. Thank you so much to our speakers, to our listeners, and to the Wines of Western Australia team, and also Wine Australia team in the background supporting this. Thank you for joining us, and questions, any outstanding questions, Wine Australia team will come back to you. Thanks so much.